always forget how many buttons there are.
Lots and lots of buttons.
So many buttons.
We're live! Welcome to The Writer's Journey. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is the resplendent Kayleen Williams. We're on a journey to learn more with you, audience, so thank you for joining us. Tonight's guest is a fantasy author best known for his best-selling series, Eragon, Eldest, Frissinger, and Inheritance, as well as The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. His new science fiction novel, To Sleep in the Sea of Stars, is out now, and I hear he's working on a super special project with his sister. But tonight, he's taking a break from it all to talk with us. Christopher Paolini, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yes, for like a month. We've been in our group and collecting questions, and now tonight is the night. So thank you for sharing your time.
And I love the comment down below there, which is, and don't forget to smash the like button, folks.
Yeah. Smash it! Hit it! Tell them it's pretty.
So today, you actually get me for the first time. I have never streamed from this location before or done an interview. So I have like two offices. So I have my main offices, which is where I do most of my interviews and other stuff. And then I have this really small office. And this is where I do a lot of writing and when I need real silence and privacy. And I know it looks all white and bare behind me, but you see it's reversed in the video. So you see there's a giant notebook behind me. That thing is huge.
Which I love it.
Over here, let's see.
We get a sneak peek, guys, for everyone watching or listening on the podcast.
Lots of notebooks.
We get a sneak peek into the private office of Christopher.
So various reference books, and you notice this actually has not been filled up, this bookcase, because I'm partially
for shame.
Partially cleared it out a few days ago.
Don't worry. Next 10 hours.
But I'm moving some books around my area, so.
So this is the inner sanctum. Where the magic happens.
Yes, and I have a cat sleeping. I have a cat sleeping on my desk here, and she may come and say hi at some point.
We would love the cat to say hi. Is this that's on your website team?
Here.
That's part of your writing team? There, your assistant.
Let's see.
Oh, it's a kitty. You're all missing the gorgeously sleeping kitty.
Yes. Sorry, what was your question about my assistant?
Is this the cat that's on your website as part of your writing team?
Yes.
The cat.
She is responsible for quite a few typos in the books because she likes to put her paw up on the keyboard when I'm writing. So that's if there's a typo, I blame it on her.
I see. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Tonight is an AMA, so folks, if you're watching live, go ahead and pop your questions in. We're going to look at three main topics, kind of go through them one at a time. Of course, we have to start with the inheritance cycle, right? Everyone knows the inheritance cycle. Everyone loves it. They miss it. They want it back. They want the series on Netflix or Amazon or something awesome. And then we will talk about your new book, which is your new science fiction book, then get into writing process questions, because a lot of us were either authors or author hopefuls. So we've got Chris here, and we're going to ask him for all of his best tips and tricks.
Well, it's easy. You just write a book that people want to read. I mean, isn't that what anyone has to do?
It's just so easy. I mean,
it's so easy. That's why I publish a book every 4 months. It's just so easy.
You're killing me.
And with that, we dig deeper on the Paolini. All right.
All right. Our first question is from Natalie Hodenk. She asked us ahead of time. She's a mega fan, she says, and she brings up a couple questions that folks might be interested in. She says, I love the Eragon book series. We'll have to check out his sci-fi books as well. However, I am super impressed that he was really young when writing Eragon. I know his parents were in the book trade, but I'd be interested to know when he actually began writing, when that stories made it from his imagination into something that could be written down formally and then published. Also, as a mega fan, I can say the movie had so much potential. We all think this. And as cases, the book came out, but the movie, not 100%. Shame, as the cast was great too. So let's break that apart and kind of go back to writing at a young age. You were 15 when you started writing your book. It took you a year to write it, a year to revise the draft, and then you got it published at 17. How did that all come to be?
Ooh, I mean, to answer that's almost like a life story. That actually answering that question was usually like the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the old presentation I used to do when I was touring for the Inheritance Cycle. So I'll condense it slightly.
We get the cliff notes.
So first of all, the idea that my parents were in publishing is a bit of a mistake, I think. I'm not quite sure how that idea got started on the internet, but my parents were and are self-employed. And growing up, they were always looking for things that they could work on together. And keep in mind, we came to Montana back in, I want to say, 86. And there was no internet, and working from home really wasn't something you could do as easily as you can nowadays. And jobs that were available in Montana sort of involved a lot of driving. So there'd be a lot of away time from your family. I mean, it's the fourth biggest state. It's the size of Germany, and we had slightly under 1 million people in the whole state back then. Wow. Yeah. So my sister and I were homeschooled. My mom is a trained Montessori teacher, and she just started teaching us right from when we were born, and that's kind of how the homeschooling happened. And by the way, shameless self-promotion here for a second. Side note, my mom actually published a couple of education books last year, which outline her educational approach and theory. It's called The Paolini Method. And the biggest of the books is called Read, Write, and Spell. And it's everything that she learned and developed on how to teach reading and writing and spelling and literacy in general. And so she's incredibly passionate about it. I'm obviously a fan of her methods also, since it worked for both my sister and me. So if anyone wants to check those out, they can go to her website, which is paulinimethod.com. So anyway, so she's educating us. My parents are working self-employed. And I read a ton, and I wrote a lot. I loved writing short stories. My short stories kept getting longer. And then for high school, my parents used an accredited distance learning school called American School, which was really helpful back in the day because you get an actual high school diploma from it. So it's not like you have to go get a GED or anything like that. It's an actual high school diploma. But you do it at home. You do it through the mail. There was no email back then. And that worked really well. But when I was doing the course material, I didn't write. So I didn't write for a couple of years because I was just focusing on the schoolwork. And as soon as I finished, it was like this dam broke. And it was like, I want to get back to writing. I want to get back into this. Of course, I also was very isolated, homeschooled, middle of Montana, didn't drive, didn't have a job, wasn't in school. And at first that was wonderful, but then I started getting bored really, really fast. And that's when the writing sort of became appealing to me. I was like, okay, I want to try to write the sort of story I enjoyed reading. And since I loved fantasy, that was a natural direction to sort of funnel my energies into. And after I wrote the first draft and decided it was crap and rewrote the first draft and then gave it to my parents, fortunately for me, they actually saw promise in it and said, we think there's something here. And that's when we did a lot of editing, and then we self-published it. And that's, I think, where the idea that my parents were in publishing comes from, because my parents had self-published one or two small educational books and some few other things, but it was print on demand. I mean, I think we sold like 50 copies, if that. So we self-published Aragon, and then I spent almost a year going around the western half of the United States, going into schools and libraries and bookstores, promoting the book in medieval costume, I might add. And,
nice touch.
And then eventually Random House caught wind of the book via Carl Hyacin, the author, who picked up a self-published copy in a bookstore, liked it, and recommended it to Random House. And then Random House came knocking, and a few days later we had a competing offer from another publishing house, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, condensed version.
That was 2003. So that's before people really heard too much about self-publishing.
There had been a couple of self-publishing successes back then. I'm trying to remember. There was some big self-published book back then that got like $1 million advance or something, and there were a couple of others. But no, it wasn't as much of a thing. I mean, ebooks were not really anything at all. I mean, you could get, HTML style books online, but there were no iPads, there were no Kindles, there were no readers of any kind, and the whole ebook market on Amazon didn't exist. So no, all of the books we sold, self-published of Aragon, were not hardcover; they were hard copy, trade paperback. So yeah, ebooks were not a thing.
Well, we have a question already about the inheritance cycle and writing it. Ronan Sparks asks, what was the hardest thing for you to do while writing in the inheritance cycle?
Tough question. When it comes to the characters, it was writing the character of Arya, because I am many things, but especially when writing the books, I am not a 100-year-old elven princess. So that was a difficulty. The biggest challenge, aside from, let's say, lack of experience, the biggest challenge was simply the time it took to write. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was working on that sucker from 1998 until late 2011, and I was touring for the book until 2012. That took me from the age of 15 until 26, 27, something like that. That was a huge chunk of my life. And it was incredibly frustrating for me at times, because there were all these things I wanted to write. I wanted to experiment. I wanted to grow. I wanted to, try my hand at other things.
Feeling, man.
Yeah. So, but the other thing is it's important to finish what you start. And it's, whether that's the first draft or whether that's your series, you have to finish what you start. That's really, really important. So just that discipline of sitting down every day and working on it, that was the hardest bit. But that's true of any project. Books are long, and the discipline required to write them is hard.
But you get snapped up by Random House, and you're still a young man. I remember I was in high school, so I was reading your books when I was in high school. Getting a job, saving up money to buy them because I was
wow.
And it was an inspiration to me. But okay, so you're snapped up by Random House, and then they take you on book tours, and yet you still have these tomes that you want to write. How did you kind of break through interruptions like that and get back into the zone of writing?
Well, I mean, I didn't. I mean, if you notice, I don't publish books very fast. It's hard, especially when you're writing large novels. Usually I could just sort of kiss 6 months goodbye when it came to the touring and the publicity, sometimes more. And because the deadlines were intense, that really made the experience of finishing each book stressful, which meant that you need recovery time after something like that. So I was averaging, I mean, I would have had Eldest published a year sooner if it weren't for the fact that I was touring because I finished this. We said I had the self-published version published in 2002, and Eldest didn't come out until, I want to say, 2004, 2005, something like that. 2004. It would have been done a year sooner. Same thing for Brissinger, same thing for Inheritance. And of course, when the movie came out, the amount of work and publicity with that was insane. So, and the crazy thing is, because so much of it happened before social media, it's like there's very little evidence of all that on the internet, all the presentations and all the crazy stuff I did. So it's actually been fun to do a lot more of it online for To Sleep in a Sea of Stars.
Well, your website, I think you had like a wiki or something up there, and it would track your updates of your news updates.
Yeah.
He's in Germany now. He's in so and so like England right now. So we were all like, wow, he's going all over the place, but we really want to hear what Aragon's doing.
Yeah.
But your story, it was like layers and layers of plot, like an onion. And as a writer, Kaylee and I, we're trying to write too. But just a plot with few plot lines, that's tricky. You had multiple plot lines, you had multiple languages, you had multiple characters. How did you get all that straight? Did you discovery write that, or did you plot it out ahead of time and then follow your outline?
I plotted out as much of it as I could before writing it, and now, knowing what I know now, I would have been able to plot out even more of it. Now, some of it you can discovery write as you go along, like the languages. Unless you were a linguist, unless you're going to spend the time that Tolkien did on the language, you can do it as you write. Assuming you come up with some basic rules for your invented languages. But I firmly believe you need to know where your main character is going, and the other characters too, but especially your main character, because that defines what type of story you're writing, and it defines what every scene and every event should be driving your character toward, or teaching them, or challenging them on whatever that theme and topic is. So, Personally, I've become more of a plotter, not less. And I know a number of published authors who have done the same. Like they started as gardeners or pantsers and they've become plotters, but I've never known a plotter to become a pantser.
So how would you do it differently now if you were to rewrite a similar book or similar series? How would you change it?
I would probably work out the world just a bit more, and I would definitely work out, books 3 and 4 a little bit greater detail than I did when I started back in the day, because I had book 1 in a lot of detail. I had book 2 in about 75% of that detail, and then the last chunk of the story was much more broad terms in terms of the skeleton of the story. And most of that stayed, but a lot of the details, like how am I going to make this happen? I knew XYZ needed to happen, but then the question of how it was actually going to happen sometimes didn't get resolved until fairly late in the game.
Well, it didn't show.
Oh, thanks.
I don't think I better, but
I'm gonna pull a question from way at the beginning, just because the questions are pouring in. We're pretty much in live question mode right now. That was quick. We've been in live question mode for 15 minutes. All right. So Matt Helset, question about a character. Inare. Oh, yes. Nailed it. Is she based on Angela from the Inheritance Cycle or your sister?
Well, this is a question from To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and I'm going to deploy my patented no comment answer. However, if you really want an answer, go read the afterword for To Sleep, and you will find an answer in there.
Oh, I like it. Mystery. All right, there's your answer, Matt. Mystery.
Terry wants to know: is there too much plotting and planning? Is that a thing?
Yes. When it tips over into procrastination, when you are plotting and planning, basically. You should never make work harder for yourself, right? Work's hard enough already. So do enough to write the story that you need. Do enough to support the story that you want to write, but don't do so much that you're not actually writing the story you want to write. It's as simple as that. So when you find that you're no longer discovering things about your world that revolutionize your understanding of it and change the story, you've probably already worked out enough to start. So for me, that would be the technology or the magic of the world I'm writing in, because that's a really fundamental thing that determines how things work and where we can go and what we can do. Basic cultural stuff, religions, politics, language, if that's going to come into it. Maybe even fashion, since that's a really important thing for humans. Food, just really the big things. And then a lot after that can be, the little spice, the little details can be added as you write. At least that's what I find. Because the other thing is, I'm always wary of getting too locked into, everything must be exactly this way or that way. You saw this with there's a lot of earlier fantasy writers who would do this. They'd stereotype an entire country of people having these characteristics or this characteristics. Like all Klingons are this, right? All Vulcans are this. And at least when it comes to humans, we can look at the crazy variety and weirdness going on in today's world. And that's why I set up these broad guidelines, and then I give myself permission to break the rules, even as long as I'm not breaking fundamental things like how the magic works or how the technology works. But there are exceptions to everything, and just because you've met a person from a certain culture or background in your universe doesn't mean they have to embody every characteristic of that background, because we're all individuals.
Right. So you don't even stereotype your own races.
I try not to. People are people. But that said, stereotypes usually have a grain of truth. There are stereotypes for a reason. I had an Italian grandfather, and boy, did he fit the stereotype of an Italian grandfather. So I could tell you some stories. So, you can go too far in the other direction.
Stereotypes can be fun for breaking through writer's block. If you've got a character who really comes alive for some reason, like a dwarf, right? They've got the accent and they do dwarven things, and they can just jump off the page when you go into all that color.
Yeah, and that's, there's no right answer for all of this. Ultimately, it comes down to execution. If you can make it work, that's all the justification you need.
All right. Well, Patricia Gillum, she asked, between fantasy and sci-fi, are there aspects of the writing process that you approach differently?
Great question. Not really. To me, it's very similar. I mean, the character work is going to be the same. The world building is going to be very, very similar. And the scientific aspects of sci-fi are very similar to working out the magical aspects of fantasy. The one real difference is that if you are attempting to write science fiction that is realistic, and by that I mean it adheres to physics as we know it, then you really have to do your homework, because we really do know a lot about physics, or at least we know some about physics, but what we do know, we really understand pretty well. So that you have to watch. That you might have to talk to experts, or you might have to, dig out your high school textbooks or start Googling and do some actual math. That's different, because you're basing stuff off real things and you can't just make it up whole cloth.
All right. That kind of segues us into the next topic of Sleep in the Sea of Stars really well. When I looked at your cover, I thought it looked kind of dreamy and philosophical. And when I started reading the book, that's what I expected to get. But that's not what I got. I got space opera with your crew. I don't want to do too many spoilers, but I got like all of the fun science fiction stuff. There's the physics, there's the diverse crew, there's a giant war, there's all kinds of elements that are there. And it made me wonder, how much research did you do before you started writing? Like, did you research the physics? Did you research the different science fiction tropes to get it all in there? How did you go about that preparation?
You're damn right I did.
Yay!
Boy, dreamy and philosophical. I kind of want to make that my Twitter handle now. The thing is dreamy and philosophical actually is the core of the story, the actual emotion I was going for, especially in the very end, the very last scene. But the rest of the story, you're right, is a much more standard adventure in a lot of ways. I did my research. I spent an entire year doing research for this book, and that included just wrapping my brain, because I wanted it to be in the real world. To Sleep in the Sea of Stars is in the real world. It's in the future, but that doesn't mean that everything we know nowadays is no longer valid. So I researched, how do spaceships work? How could they work? What sort of power sources might we have? What are the advantages and disadvantages of thorium versus hydrogen-3 fusion? And just the list goes on and on. What sort of weapons would work in space? How would they work? Where would computers be going? Is AI even a thing that might be possible? True AI. And the thing that I spent the most time doing research on was faster than light technology, because I wanted faster than light, but I didn't want FTL that was going to allow for time travel, which, according to physics as we know it today, actually according to Einstein, if you go faster than light, you automatically have a time machine, and you can either send a signal back in time, or you can physically travel back in time and kill your own grandfather or some nonsense like that. And I have nothing against time travel as a storytelling device, but I didn't want every spaceship in my universe to be automatically a time machine. So I set myself the challenge of finding an FTL system that hadn't been used by some other sci-fi franchise, that didn't contradict physics as we knew it, and didn't allow for time travel. And that took the bulk of the year of research. I ended up finding a rocket engineer who dabbles in theoretical physics by the name of Greg Mahalik, who has a really cool theory of, I don't want to say a theory of everything, but it borders on that. And he and some other guys have developed this, and Greg Mahalik is his name, and he was very kind and held my hand and walked me through the theory, and then that formed the basis for my FTL and a whole bunch of other stuff in the book actually also. So and normally I would not spend this amount of time on research. I wouldn't even recommend other authors do this. But the reason it was worth it for me is because To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is the first book in what I'm calling the Fractalverse. And in fact, if people have hardcover, you can see the Fractalverse logo is embossed on the cover. So I'm planning on writing a lot of stories in the Fractalverse, and it includes the real world. So if I want to write a thriller or a romance or anything, it's in the Fractalverse. So for a setting that's that important for me, that effort was worth it. And by the way, this is the Fractalverse pin, which is on our Etsy store, by the way. More shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, go pick one up, man. All you people listening, watching. But I want to say I love that you took hard sci-fi into consideration when writing this. because that just opens the door for so many more readers. I myself am a hard sci-fi writer. So the fact that you took the time to really consider those things that a lot of people, it's like, can it snow on the moon? Well, yes, it can under these conditions. Like, I just discovered that, by the way, from one of my very own like super science.
Ooh, that's pretty cool.
Well,
but the thing is to me, doing that research actually leads to more interesting things. Like if I had simply said,
awesome.
if I'd simply said, my ships can't travel through time, even though they have an FTL drive, and there's a brief bit of technobabble, or I just ignore the problem, then I actually would have missed out on a ton of interesting world building that I ended up with. So to me, I find, and I learned this with my fantasy, that the questions where you want to skim over it because it's difficult or hard, those are the questions you need to burrow into, because that's where the gold is. So yeah, I love, and I wanted to write realistic sci-fi that had a bit of a mythic feel to it, especially near the end. So it's still realistic. It's stretching the boundaries of what may be possible with physics, but even my invented physics, but it still is all physically possible in one way or another.
Plausible.
Yeah.
With that, I'm totally gonna squish in there and just be like, bam, in your face, because we have a spotlight. We have a very special spotlight, because today our spotlight is on To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by our very own Christopher Paolini. Now a New York Times and USA Today bestseller, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is a brand new epic novel from #1 New York Times bestselling author of Aragon, Christopher Paolini. And I already forgot how to pronounce his damn name. Kira Navarez.
Bingo.
Oh, I remembered. Okay. Kira Navarez, I'm going to say it again, dreamed of life on new worlds. Now she's awakened a nightmare. During a routine survey mission on an uncolonized planet, Kira finds an alien relic. At first, she's delighted, but elation turns to terror when the ancient dust around her begins to move. As war erupts among the stars, Kira is launched into a galaxy-expanding odyssey of discovery and transformation. First contact isn't at all what she imagined, and events push her to the very limits of what it means to be human. While Kira faces her own horrors, Earth and its colonies stand upon the brink of annihilation. Now, Kira might be humanity's greatest and final hope of doom, because we always have doom.
And don't forget, it also has puns and tentacles in it, so it's got to be good.
Puns and tentacles of doom. Get your copy today. Click. I know.
You should have heard the taglines I came up for the book when we were trying to come up with marketing taglines. They were all way too cheesy. I was doing things like with doom or in space, and no.
We always have doom.
People like that.
I know. My favorite blurb that I ever read was from Tad Williams for the book Orcs, and which I've never read the darn book. I have it in my pile to read, but I bought the book because the blurb from Tad Williams was "Buy now or beg for mercy later." I was like, that is the best blurb I've seen. I'm buying this book.
Nice.
Oh, like Christopher Paolini with tentacles. I mean, who wouldn't buy that? Come on.
I know, right? There you go.
All right, so we're going to talk about your book, but we don't want to spoil it? Or people just go buy it now and then watch the rest of the show later? Like, how are we going to do this? Okay, so
Spoiler alert. If you haven't read it, do not continue. Maybe.
Your book has philosophical elements in it, but it's got the space opera, it's got the adventure, it's got the thriller, it has a little bit of superhero, I don't want to spoil kind of elements. It's got all that fun stuff. Did you, when you were researching, did you study those tropes and decide to put them in your book, or did it just kind of organically come out of the story as you read it?
Well, actually, going back to our previous talk about like research, the goal was not to dump a bunch of research on the readers. The goal was to give myself an understanding of the world so I could tell this hopefully entertaining story. All the technobabble and details are in the back of the book. It's not dumped on the readers. And as far as like the story itself and the elements, the same thing like with the philosophy. And I don't want to dump anything on the readers. It's telling a story that makes sense. Yeah, no, everything was very conscious. I didn't go out and study these tropes or anything, or these elements of science fiction, because I'm very familiar with science fiction. I've been reading it since I was knee high to a grasshopper, as they say. Um, but figuring out what type of story this was and how it was going to work was a long process. I wrote the first draft of the book. I mean, I finished the first draft of the book at the beginning of 2016, and it didn't work. And I spent most of 2016 and into 2017 rearranging the deck chairs, so to speak, rewriting the book, trying to get it to work without changing that basic structure. But it was my editor and my agent who finally said, you've done really good work, but the rewrites aren't succeeding. And that's when I had to really step back and say, what type of story is this? Do I want to keep working on it? I mean, I wrote 200 pages of notes in a week and a half during that process. And yeah, I consciously thought of, are there parts of, let's say, a superhero origin story here? Is there sort of tie into the mythic iconography of, fertility and other things? Is that, how am I tying into the theme of bodily autonomy? Because my main character has to deal with that question of, what happens when your body doesn't behave the way you want it? And we all have that experience in life. Even if you're healthy, as you get older, your body isn't the way you want it to be necessarily. And how you deal with that mentally, physically, emotionally is, I think, an incredibly important part of our lives. Dealing with what can't be changed while still attempting to gain personal control over your mental state, your emotional state, seems to me to be almost the human condition, the ultimate state of the human condition. There's a line from the philosopher Camus, which I'm going to badly paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me, but it's on his essay on Sisyphus, who's, endlessly pushing the stone up the hill, and it always rolls back every day. And there's some line in there where he says something like everything in the universe, everything in the world is okay because I say it is. And the implication is not necessarily that it's everything in the world is okay, but that we can control our response to the world around us. We can't control the universe, but we can control ourselves and our response to the universe. So all of those were things that I wanted to write about and felt deeply about and thought about. I mean, none of that was accidental.
Yeah, this coming from the man who wrote The Plague, right? But the bubonic plague affecting his characters, and yet he has that to say to the world. That's pretty powerful. But your character gets into something similar too pretty early on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about a lot of. Another thing is I'm talking about like a lot of big concepts here, but I'm also a pulp writer at heart. So, as I said, there are tentacles and puns.
Yeah,
yeah. We get the flavor of all of this, like, just like, so much good soul searching tentacle pun.
Well, that's the thing. I'm a big believer in humor, because even bad humor, because that was actually one of my big complaints with Battlestar Galactica. Was that I thought it needed more. The reboot, I thought it needed more humor, and I love that show, by the way. But it's just, when things are grim, people crack jokes. You do when it's really stressful. I mean, I think some of the worst, when I think of something like the darkest times in my life, and that's usually when I was cracking jokes, just because that's how, at least for me, that's how I often cope with a situation, and I've seen it with other people also. So it's not always appropriate, but every once in a while.
It gets you through. And it gets other people through with you. It gets your team. All right, so I noticed, again, really early on that you've got this really diverse set of characters in your book. Different races, like not just human, like completely different races.
Different species.
Yeah, like your aliens are very alien. They're not just humans in a cat suit or humans with an extra arm or something, or you're different, or they're purple. They're very alien aliens. And even your human characters are extremely diverse. Was that something that you intended? I want to have a diverse cast, or is that kind of organically, spontaneously come out of the story as you told it?
No, it was very conscious, because when I was originally designing this future, I actually almost didn't have aliens in the Fractalverse to start with, because the odds of us encountering sentient alien life are fairly low, at least as far as we know at the moment. So it seems to me that if we do start moving out into the universe, even if we do finally alien life, it probably won't be sentient, at least not to start with. And given enough time, it seems to me that humans will start to speciate on their own. We will start using more gene hacks. We'll be able to manipulate our biology a lot more. And we'll simply be living so far apart if we're able to colonize places like Mars or even other solar systems. We will start diverging genetically. And I think there's a good chance this will happen in real life. We may end up becoming our own aliens, which I think is like the coolest idea ever. Yeah. So I was just thinking, if we're several hundred years into the future and genetic manipulation has advanced to this point, and all of these other things, then humanity is going to be, a real Skittles bowl of variety. And, again, I go back to being homeschooled. Montana, especially back in the 80s and 90s, was about as homogenous as you get. I mean, seriously homogenous. And when I left Montana and started touring especially when I started touring for Random House and going to large cities and then Europe and all around the world, I mean, the sheer variety of the world, the complexity of the world, really struck me. I mean, I think that if you grow up in New York City, if you grow up in Los Angeles or New York, or London or somewhere else, maybe that doesn't strike you as much. You're just used to that. But it was almost like that. I'm sure you've heard the phrase future shock, right? I went from living in this 89-year-old farmhouse with asbestos shingles and building forges for myself, literally hammering hot metal and having no money to buy anything. I built myself an easel because I couldn't spend $20 for an easel, and things like that, to flying into New York City and seeing this insane edifice that humans have built. So I think that really influenced how I think about the future. I wanted to take all of that and just dial it up to 11. It's going to be like that and then more. And sure, there'll probably be even more isolated areas of humanity in the future, but in general, we are a wandering species, which is why we've covered the entire world. And I don't think that's going to change.
So I like how conscious you are about each decision that you're making character-wise. What are these characters saying? What's this overall arc value? Probably even in the scene. How is that scene wrapping into this chapter? How is that chapter wrapping into this like chunk of things? What am I setting up for book 2? Because everyone's going to want it. That, a lot of times I shouldn't say a lot of times, I do see often enough that authors aren't taking enough conscious time to really think of who that character is, how they're plugging into this world, that you at least understand its basic mechanics. So you're really able to then dig that much deeper.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the mental and physical ability to actually write a book, then putting the time in beforehand to do exactly what you're talking about is never wasted time. And you can decide for yourself how deep you want to go, but it's not wasted time. And it's been the only reason I can actually write books that are semi-decent. Because if I don't put that time in, I default to very shallow choices and thoughts when writing. I can't write and world build and character build and plot at the same time. My brain is a one-track brain. So
really hard.
Very hard. Yeah.
I've tried.
And I hate rewriting. So, and I've done a ton of rewriting. I have literally done 4 years of rewriting at this point on this book. So, I say I hate rewriting, but I've done a ton of it. But rewriting is very difficult because you lay down you lay down tracks with your first draft, and then those become hardened in your brain. And so changing your perception of them, shifting your ideas in different directions becomes physically hard. It's almost like changing a political belief or changing a religious belief, because your brain locks onto something so hard that then wrenching your thoughts into a different direction is incredibly difficult. So I would rather do the work beforehand to just avoid having to do it later.
So I'm going to see if I can articulate this question without it being the average question that I do hear a lot. So your process, which we've a little bit in the beginning, but we kind of know a little bit more about you as far as how you're mentally working through these things. So some authors, they have like this wall of post-it notes, and then there's world building on pink, and then characters have different colors.
Yeah.
How are you not writing as you're gathering this information to figure out the characters, the world, your different arcs, the tonal values that you want? How are you sort of organizing that before you're putting actual prose into the computer or on the paper?
Well, I mean, you might have seen all the leather notebooks up on the shelf up there. I write a ton by hand. I'm currently working.
Yes.
I'm currently working in this notebook.
Wow.
Which is
that
chunky.
totally
It's a tome, guys.
And it's got like the the stained pages, tea stained pages. So that's fun. I've got another notebook here I've been working in. This is just a fun little. Let's see. There we go.
You give yourself fun places to write in.
Yeah, it's important to enjoy the process. So I find that if I write by hand, it activates a different part of my brain. And so I do all of my note-taking, all of my world building, all my plotting by hand with a fountain pen. Let's see, I've got at least one fountain pen here.
He's just like ticking off all of my excited boxes. I'm just like, longhand, yes, fountain pen.
This is
do it.
Yeah, this is a Lamy Safari with Noodler's Slippery Eel ink in, which works great. Let's see, I've got another fountain pen here.
Right pen matters.
This one,
it does.
This one is a, I don't know what type of fountain pen this is. This is an antique, super light. I filled the whole barrel with ink and works great. I have like a ton of other fountain pens. And the reason I use fountain pens is not because I'm pretentious, although I might be pretentious, who knows. It's because fountain pens take way less physical effort to write with. The pens just glide across the paper. So it's like a gel pen, but better. So it reduces. Yeah, exactly. So I write all of the stuff in notebooks, and then I will transcribe the relevant information if I need it into the computer. And then a number of years ago, this is an authorial extravagance, but I had my assistant, because when you write enough books, you get to have an assistant. So I'm lucky there. I had my assistant build me a personal wiki. And she did this first for the inheritance cycle in Allegasia with all the characters, all the places, all the things, and every entry has like multiple pages of text and images. And then also we did this for the science fiction side of things also. And I built most of that as I was writing to sleep with names and places and information and stuff. And that is incredibly helpful. Now, that's an extravagance, as I said. If you're starting out, you don't need that. You can do what I did when I was working on the inheritance cycle, which is just keep MS Word documents. Keep a document for your people, places, and things. Keep a document for your languages. Keep a document for plot outline notes. Keep a document for languages. It's really, you don't need a wiki. A wiki's nice, but you don't need a wiki.
Yeah. So to condense, you are outlining your vomit through your notebooks.
Yes. And it is vomit because I do it by talking to myself. If you read my notebooks, it literally is, I'm going to literally give you an example of what it would say. It would be like, I wonder how I can do this. Would it work if I do this? No, it's me talking to myself for hundreds and hundreds of pages of handwriting. If someone ever reads this stuff, they're going to, go insane.
There's the gold. There is the answer to the question. He talks to himself by handwriting out all of his thoughts.
Yeah.
And then we're going to retranscribe that into like, no, that was crap. This is good. That's in language. That's a race. This is a other place. And
here's why it's important to talk to yourself, because storytelling is narration. And if you have writer's block on a certain plot point, there are different reasons for writer's block, but if your writer's block is because you're not quite sure how to move the story forward or what is supposed to happen in a certain place, go tell the story to someone else. And 9 times out of 10, in the act of telling it out loud, you will solve the problem, because humans are natural storytellers. We are storytelling animals. If you're sitting around a campfire and you have to make up a story on the spot, guess what? 9 times out of 10, you can do it. So if you're telling someone the story that has the problem in it, your brain will often solve it as you'll realize what the problem is. Like, oh yeah, I could do this, and da 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 da. So I'm a big believer in understanding your story to the point that you can narrate it to someone verbally. You don't have to do this, but you could theoretically do it because that means you understand your story.
Yeah, I think storytelling is extremely important. I've noticed there's a trend in books getting published where it's a lot of dialogue, it's a lot of action sentences, but not a lot of storytelling sentences. And I was listening to Sleep in the Sea of Stars. I was thinking there's a lot of storytelling as the main character. She's thinking through things, she's reflecting on things, she's interpreting things and predicting things. And the storytelling is what's making it come alive to me, even though it's it's an audiobook, I'm listening to it. I really keyed in on that, the story being told. They say show, don't tell, right? Yeah. Well, there's a place for storytelling.
Well, and it depends what you mean by show, don't tell. I love telling when it's done well. Like Ursula Le Guin was really good at that, and that's one reason why her books are so short, actually, because she could often tell you what was happening and do it in a beautiful way. And it's a much more of the narrator device. We don't really have narrators in books the way we used to, unless it's like a first person or something like that. But everything Into Sleep is seen through Kira's eyes, and so it's shown through her eyes, and then it's her commenting on it in one way or another, whether mentally or non-verbally or some other way. And so that may be as telling, but it's always through her, and I think that's hopefully what makes it bearable to the readers.
Well, speaking of storytelling, Shadow asks, who is your favorite author? Who do you read when not writing?
He's thinking, folks.
There's no one author. There are too many authors to choose from. It's impossible. I love Dune. I'll always go back and read Dune. I love Smilla's Sense of Snow by Peter Hoag. I love Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. I loved the Hyperion series by Dan Simmons back in the day, but I haven't read it in ages. I'll read Jane Austen any day of the week. Same for Dickens. I'm currently rereading Shakespeare's sonnets, just because
nice.
You can't go wrong with Shakespeare.
Right.
So I like stuff that pushes me linguistically. So I'm a big fan of The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison, which is pre-Tolkien and written in faux Jacobean English, and took me 3 tries to get through it the first time I read it. I love the Gormenghast series by Mervyn Peake, which is the most gothiest emo piece of fantasy you'll ever read outside of Edgar Allan Poe. Beowulf. Oh yes.
So you're just like a melting pot of all the things.
Pretty much. Which reminds me of there's a line from Edgar Allan Poe. I don't have my Edgar Allan Poe book in here, but let's see if I can get this from memory. So he wrote what I think is like the gothiest, most emo line ever, and it's it's the start of one of his poems, and it goes, if I remember correctly, I dwelt alone in a world of moan.
Ooh.
And I read it, and it's a beautiful line, but the first time I read it, I just started laughing. I was like, I dwelt alone in a world of moan.
I know that feeling.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. That's 2020. That's this year. Well, we're kind of in it together, too.
The curse of interesting times.
Yeah. And we had a question also about Stephen King. Have you read any Stephen King? What do you think about his ideas and skills as well?
I think Stephen King is a fantastic storyteller. And one of his greatest strengths is his authorial voice. The reason he can get away with almost anything is because he is the storyteller telling you the story. In fact, he'll often make comments to the readers in the text of a book. He'll say, let Uncle Stevie, tell you, just hold my hand and let me take you down this road. He doesn't always break the fourth wall like this, but the ease with which he is able to tell his stories comes about through his natural proficiency and then just all his years of practice. People say, where does your voice come from? What is an authorial voice? Your authorial voice comes from A, conscious choices you make, and then B, solving the same problems over and over and over and over again. And you develop a style of preferences from that practice. And he's been doing it for so long and so many books that, he's really good at it. I love the Dark Tower series. Really enjoyed that. Cujo had some great bits in that. Sometimes, I don't think this is a uncommon thing to say. Structurally, Some of his stories maybe could be stronger, but that's because of he's more of the gardener approach to writing rather than the plotter. And I know he said that if he were to, when he's tried plotting his whole story beforehand, it doesn't work for his brain, and his writing just kind of dries up and doesn't work. So, for what he does, and he does it very, very well. I think he's a master.
All right, everyone listening out there, I want you to just rewind 30 seconds and re-listen to that. Follow the instincts of your authorial voice, because that is who you are. That is where your strength is, and that is uniquely you, and no one else can say it like you can.
As they say, don't try to be someone else. Be the best version of you, because no one else can be you. And it's true. I'm not the first person to write about dragons or magic swords. I'm not the first person to write about aliens with tentacles, but I'm the only one who wrote about it the way I did. And that's because I'm me.
Boom.
Well, we've got other Poe fans in the house, and also William Blake fan. Shout out to Shadow the Illustrator.
Ah, yeah.
All right. Other questions about writing process, Patricia? Patricia Gillum, I think we covered this one. I'm curious about your writing process and how if it's changed since you first started. But yeah, anything else that you'd like to add on to how your writing process has changed since you're 15?
It's gotten a lot more structured. I like so many of us, I get a cool idea and want to just jump into writing it. And now I really force myself to do the homework before I start writing. I think about it almost like preparing a magic trick. The story, when the reader reads it, is a magic trick, but they don't need to see all the work that goes into it. But putting that work into it allows you to pull off the magic trick as beautifully as you can. So I'm a lot more structured, and I don't get as bothered by the fact that I don't often get things right the first time. And I've learned that that's okay. That's part of the process. And if you look at published examples of editing from authors who've been working for decades and decades, and Stephen King is a great example, you'll see that even people who are incredibly accomplished as authors are still ripping their prose apart, are still revising and improving. And that's a natural part of it. So if you write a bad sentence or a bad paragraph or a bad character or a bad scene or storyline, or even if you write a bad book, that does not mean you're a bad author. It only means you're a bad author if you see it and you're not willing to fix it. So, if I write something that doesn't work, I might get a little bummed, but I just sort of shrug and go, okay, well, that's just one step along the process. I'm now going to fix it and make it better. As they often say in the military, embrace the suck, by which they mean, embrace the hard parts of the process, because that is part of the process, and it doesn't mean anything's going wrong, doesn't mean anything's bad. It's just what needs to be done.
Yeah, well, earlier you said that it can be as hard as changing your political or religious point of view, but for a manuscript, you're talking about tens of thousands of words that you might be cutting. So not just the thought that you're cutting, it's like...
I'm sorry, did you say tens of thousands of words?
It could be.
Get back to me when we're talking about hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. I was
tens of hundreds of thousands.
I didn't want to put that number on you, but I suspected it might be one.
I keep a file for every book that I'm writing, and it's called cut file, and it's where I put all of my cut material.
So you keep it.
I keep it because sometimes it's good. It's often reusable, or it's worth keeping for posterity or what have you. Because I keep all the versions of my file backed up, but it's nice to have large chunks of things that if they're cut, I can go reference it for whatever reason. To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I did not keep everything. It just got beyond me at one point, but I checked, and there's 138,000 words of cut material from that book.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna go like this because that is doing the damn work and making it the best ever. Love it.
I hope so.
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but I'm actually really curious about this. So, how do you do that? Do you reimagine those whole chapters and the whole chapters, or do you
sure? I mean, so as I mentioned with To Sleep, the first draft and then the versions of the first draft didn't work. So when I reimagined the story and restructured it, I gave myself complete freedom to do whatever I needed to do to make the story work. So if you've read the book, everything after the first quarter of the second section of the book was basically written from scratch. None of that was in the original version of the book. So all of the locations they visit in section 3, 4, 5, and 6 were not in the book. Not to get into spoilers, but the nightmares were not in the book.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a lot of work done.
So you allowed yourself the freedom of discovery writing, even through having done all this major research, all this planning, all this understanding of your character arcs. You're just like, this isn't working for where I'm going.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna scrap all that, and this is way better.
Well, but to be fair, before I did the revision, I plotted out the whole revision. So when I
that's his cut. Okay.
Yeah, when I went back into the rewrites, I was not going to flail around in the dark. I only went into it with once I had a clear plan. It was like, I know where I'm going. I know this is going to work. And that's the only reason I was able to finally publish this book.
And then what role did your Random House editor play in this process?
Michelle is a wonderful editor. She was reading early versions of the book. The assumption at that point was that the book would be at Random House, and I have enough leverage there that even though she's a young adult editor, she would still have been able to edit the book wherever it ended up at Random House. Because To Sleep, so my original publisher at Random House is Alfred A. Knopf, which has a children's division, which is where Aragon is at. And since To Sleep is an adult novel, it would have needed to have been published through an adult imprint. And that meant taking it to the different adult imprints at Random House and having a conversation with them. Ultimately, we needed to find the best home for To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and that ended up being at Tor. And then I worked with 2 new editors there, which was Will and Davey. So it was a big shift for me because I worked with Michelle from the end of 2002 until beginning of last year when Fork Witch Worm was published. And we will work together in the future, but she's been my editor my whole life, basically, and my whole professional life. So it was a big shock to work with new editors. I learned a lot, and the book is certainly different for it than it would have been with Michelle. Yeah, I mean, this book was the first time where I ever had editors. Not only were we cutting things, but my editors asked me to add quite a bit. And even as I was cutting things during the editing process, I was adding material, and the book ended up 30,000 words longer than when I started editing. And I have never had that happen in my life. I always had dropped, 10 to 15% over the course of editing.
Were they giving you developmental editing suggestions, like storyline planning?
No storyline. It was all world building stuff. So I went into To Sleep not wanting to info dump my readers, really focusing on writing as tightly as possible because of the experience I had writing fantasy. I was like, I want to write tight now. I don't want to info dump. And everything that my editors at Tor were asking for were essentially more world building stuff. It was like, so tell us a little bit more about the political situation. Tell us a little bit more about, the corporation that Kira works for, what her feelings toward that are, what is their logo or things like that. Tell us the names of these Marines. Give us a little bit more here. Give us this a little bit more there. So it was all world building stuff. It made the work a lot richer, but it also made it very difficult in the editing because it made it difficult to decide what was actually important and what wasn't. Being asked to add stuff in the middle of tightening things up, it was a tricky process.
Oh, if you're a different author, maybe they would have had different advice. Maybe they would have had.
Totally. No, they definitely would have. And on a different book that I hadn't been working on so long, they would have had different advice also. There were a lot of seams because I had reworked so much material, and there were portions that had been cut and pasted from other versions in so that, the structure could get filled out the way it needed to be. So a lot of those seams needed to be ironed out. And actually there's one typo that slipped through, well, 1 or 2 typos. One where a character is supposed to only have one hand and actually has 2 hands for one paragraph. So we'll fix that in reprints.
All right, snag up those rare copies. I'm gonna post this on really quick for question because they are desperate for you to answer. I mean, I've seen it a few times and I've been trying to sneak it in, so I'm sneaking in and out. All right, Natsu Dragneel. Hopefully I didn't destroy that. Do you have any plans to come to Vietnam?
Unfortunately, no. I would love to. I've heard great things about Vietnam, but at the moment with coronavirus, I'm not traveling at all. I'm doing these virtual events. I don't know if the book's going to be published there quite yet. I hope so. Aragon, of course, was published in Vietnamese. And I think there's a good chance To Sleep will be published there as well. But it takes a little time for a new book to pick up all these like foreign rights deals.
It's
so
a whole huge ball of everything.
yeah. And as I think I said earlier, you know, I was looking forward to this massive book tour that was going to happen for To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I mean, it was going to be a huge international, national, overseas book tour. But the upside of not doing that has been doing all these virtual events, which is new for me. I mean, it's been interesting. I've heard people saying like, you know, Christopher's been around forever, but you know, I've never actually seen him or heard him talk. And I'm like, but I've done all these presentations. And then I realized, but none of them have been online. They've all been in person. And, you know, I got sick pretty much every year I was touring or traveling. This year is the first year I have not gotten sick in like the last 4 or 5 years. So because of the travel. So I'm not missing the con crud. And, you know, I mean, I know George R. R. Martin has talked about it also. You go to a convention and you often lose 2 weeks after the convention, you know, between or combined with the convention. Yeah, but between the travel, the exhaustion, and then if you get sick, you know, it knocks out half a month. So, but I would definitely love to go to Vietnam someday.
All right.
Kyle, he says, will you consider doing a fan casting? Messenger is my Bible. I want to play Trick. Pretty please. I've read the new book twice. Clearly, he loves this book. Trick, oh, much fun.
Well, for those who don't know, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars has been picked up for a movie deal. I'm actually executive producing, and my sister and I are writing the screenplay, which is a lot of fun. When we get to the state of casting, if we're so lucky as to get to the point of casting, if there are open casting slots or anything like that, casting auditions, I'll be sure to let the fans know. Fan casting meaning casting fans, or
honestly, I thought that he was talking about like in a book, but now that I know y'all are making friggin' movies over here. You know, let the Keystroke know, and we'll put it out there. It's like, y'all, if you want to be in Christopher Paolini's movie and be seen and be auditioned, here's your info. So we'll make that happen for you.
Yeah.
Right to Hale. So go Keystroke Medium on the Facebook and the places, and yeah, we'll get that happening.
Yeah, if there's open casting, I'll certainly be sure to let everyone know.
Stephanie Zerby says, we are happy to see you here, Christopher, and we are very.
Oh, well, I'm happy to see you guys.
Dennis says, hello from Brussels, Belgium. Question, is there a chance to see a role-playing game set in the Fractalverse?
Yes, so great question. Basically, because of the Aragon movie, there are a lot of rights that are tied up for Aragon. That means I can't do certain things with that world, which is frustrating. But that's not a problem for the Fractalverse, and we're doing a lot of stuff with the Fractalverse. And so role-playing game is definitely something we would like to get made. It'll take a little while, but we're talking to the right people. So not only do we have merch like this pin, we also have art prints, Badali jewelry, which does amazing jewelry for like Patrick Rothfuss and Sanderson, and now myself has done some beautiful Fractalverse pendants, and they're going to be doing some more jewelry in the future, including earrings and all sorts of other cool stuff. In conjunction with Jennifer Hale, who read the English audiobook and just absolutely killed it. I mean, for those who don't know, Jennifer is an amazing voice actress, and she was the female lead in the Mass Effect video games, among many other projects she's done in her life. But she has a great voice, and so with her and her producing partner, we did a song, an in-universe song for the Fractalverse that's called Sea of Stars. So if you just go to YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or wherever, and you just search Jennifer Hale, Sea of Stars, the song will come up. And I absolutely love the song because it really captures a lot of the feel I was going for with the story, and also a lot of what the journey of writing this book was like. So there's that. I've actually been commissioning some professional concept art from Hollywood. at no small price, but commissioning some professional concept art for the Fractalverse, which we're going to be releasing probably in the next few weeks. We've got something special coming up. We'll be releasing concept art. I've already seen a piece of concept art for the Extenuating Circumstances, one of the spaceships in the book, and it looks jaw-dropping. So I sketched it. They drew it. They did their awesome work, and this thing looks absolutely amazing.
All right, so speaking of merch, because we do have one very special illustrator that just for some reason loves come hanging out with us authors. She saw your journal with the blank pages and the old. She wants to know how to get one, and so
this one.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah,
that may be the one. So yeah, you need to make that a merch of the Fractalverse and have those available.
I think I picked that up at Denver Comic-Con. There are always the booths that have the leather notebooks, and it wasn't that expensive actually for that one. I mean, usually you'd think it'd be like $130 or something, but it wasn't. It was a decent price. So yeah, we'll probably do some notebooks. And actually, hold on one second.
You don't need to say that because I have a problem with the notebooks.
Yeah, I'm addicted to the notebooks. So Target actually had a pre-order sales campaign for To Sleep in the Sea of Stars, and they included this with the book.
Nice.
As a promotional thing.
A journal to go with it.
Yeah, I don't know why I have a ding in it. I think I have some piece of metal that's getting. Oh, it's this other notebook that's digging into it. A fan gave me.
Oh, cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
It's got
but they're not within reach. None of them are within reach.
It's got like a leopardy creature wolfy creature on the front.
Yeah, so I'm spoiled with notebooks here, and I do love good notebooks, and I have more than I'll probably be able to finish and fill in the next couple of years, including that giant one. It's a good problem to have.
Actually, I asked if he's answered your questions. Yes, he did. So you're gonna have to go back and watch.
Yes. Rewind, rewatch, and don't forget
rewind. And Ronan says, thanks for mentioning Rothfuss. He loves him. What else do you have? Questions?
Coincidentally enough, 2011 seems to have been a bit of a cursed year for fantasy writers, because 2011 is the year when I published my last large novel, Rothfuss published his last book, and George R. Martin published his last book. So...
Oh, what happened?
I don't know.
In the literary world?
I don't know.
Well, we're going to have on Betsy Walheim later.
Ooh.
And she'll have the answer to some of these mysteries.
I think you maybe shouldn't ask her, actually.
I was going to get her on and talk about DAW books and her work as an editor and what goes into making a book a success, all that excellent stuff.
I've been a big fan of her work and big fan of DAW, and I think Tad Williams is over at DAW also.
Yeah. So. Mentored a lot of really excellent.
Thank you, Terry. Glad to answer your questions.
We've touched on so many things. Don't even all the stuff has been happening in this last hour or so. Any last minute questions, concerns, concepts?
Yes, if anyone else has any questions.
Because we're a little bit over.
So actually, wait, there was a question here. I'm not sure if I answered from Akshay, and I'm not going to attempt your last name because I know I'll butcher it. And you were saying, I'm currently in college and I'm just starting out as a writer. So what is your advice for people like me, such as for outlines, pacing, character development, conflict, etc.? That's the question, yeah. So basically, as I keep saying, is outline your stories beforehand. And the way you do that and the way you build your universe, your world, and your story is by asking and answering questions as honestly as you can. So as an example, what would happen what sort of world would a dragon live in? What would happen if a dragon egg appeared in the middle of a forest? Who might find the dragon egg? Where did he come from? Who else would be looking for the dragon egg? And so forth and so on. Plotting is simply asking and answering questions. World building is simply asking and answering questions. Storytelling is the process of posing and then answering those questions for your readers. You can also get very structured. I mean, if you're very, very, very serious about being a good author, you can get You can go above and beyond, and it will not be wasted effort. And by that I mean, take some fiction that you like, or even nonfiction. Take some writing that you like. Copy down a paragraph or two by hand. You can't type it. You have to do this by hand. Copy down a couple of sentences or a paragraph by hand. Write a note about every sentence. Write a sentence about every sentence you've written down, saying, what does this sentence do? What is in it? How is the author accomplishing what they're accomplishing? Then put that away and try to rewrite that paragraph. Try to copy it from memory. Then
Practice.
Then take that paragraph you love and try to convert it into verse. Try to convert it into poetry. Try to convert it back. This is actually a method that Benjamin Franklin used in order to teach himself how to write. And it is a pain in the ass, and it is incredibly hard work, and it works. That's the thing, it works. So if you're willing to put in more work than any other person would normally put in, you'll be able to get to where you want to go.
That is
work your
advice.
Yeah. Also, there's a great book called Style by F.L. Lucas, which is an amazing prose style book, and it's way better than Elements of Style by Strunk and White. So Style by F.L. Lucas, and then Shakespeare's Metrical Art, which is the best book I've ever read on poetry and verse. And there are a lot of good books on like the structure of stories. I'm partial to the book Story by Robert McKee, which is a screenwriting book. But there are a lot of good ones out there that you could pick up and learn some stuff from.
All right, so we have some final questions. Roran asked, did Garrow know magic? And did he know about his sister story?
Garrow did not know magic, and he did know most of his sister's story because, of course, she came back to Carvajal to give birth to Aragon.
Okay. Actually asked, do you have any other advice for aspiring writers?
Don't give up. Write about the things you love the most. Writing books can be difficult, and it takes a large amount of time, so pick subject material that you're truly passionate about and you truly care about, and that'll help get you through the whole process. Find someone in your life who can help edit your work, because if you find a good editor, you will learn more from editing than you ever will just from writing. But editing is a two-edged sword. If you find a bad editor, it can destroy you and your writing. So stay true to your own judgment, believe in yourself, be open to editing, but don't be so open that you allow someone to basically ruin your love of writing or your own style. And be consistent. Try to write every day, even if it's only for half an hour or 15 minutes. If you write a 1 page a day for a year, you have a book. So treat it like playing a musical instrument. Treat it like playing a sport. Think about it like you're training your mind for a sport or your body for a sport. And you just have to put that time in, day out.
All right, don't give up and keep on writing.
Yes.
Terry asked, when will we get another part of The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm? That part 1 has been driving me nuts.
Yeah, I was hoping to write it this year, but it has not happened. So I'm hoping to write it as soon as something like that in Allegasia once I finish the screenplay. So I've been writing about spaceships for a while. It's time to get back to dragons.
Good.
All right, your future, y'all.
Right. Dennis asked, being a big fan of the isekai, I don't know if that's right, genre, I wondered about something. What would happen if the UMC discovered the world of Aragon? How do you reckon it would unfold?
Badly, because magic trumps technology.
Bomb, 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 and then chaos and doom.
That's
There
right.
you
The only way you beat magic is by dropping a large asteroid on them fast enough they can't see it before it hits them.
Float it, send it somewhere else.
And I'm pretty sure there's some anime somewhere that's done that.
Now I've read that in a book this year, that exact thing, and it worked. It worked like a charm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that was the last of our questions.
Awesome.
All right, so
And
I have tiny people scratching at my door. So before they ferment at the mouth, I am going to say thank you so much for joining us, sharing your brain mass, and giving us all of this amazing, really trying to dig deep on those answers, because sometimes it can be so hard, for it's like, how do you do your process? And you're just like, I write it. you really dug deep on there, and to give some explanation, to give all the other aspiring writers, current authors who've already written all the books, something more to think about in their own process. So for that, is there anywhere you would like to remind people where they can find you in your work? Either, is there certain places where you like to touch base with fans, things like that?
Sure. I'm most active personally on Twitter, and my handle is @Paolini. But I also have accounts on Instagram and Facebook and elsewhere, and I'm posting stuff all of there, keeping people up to date on what's going on. Also, I've been a lot more active on YouTube recently. I have a series of writing tips going, which are called crispy writing tips. So yes, it's horrible and pun filled, and is the best thing I've ever done in my life. So I'm enjoying it so much, and I'm just trying to post the sort of things that I wish I had known when I was starting out. So if people are interested, they can check that out. There's a lot of stuff on that channel. And of course, I have my website, paolini.net. And as I just did an interview with another journalist a couple of days ago, and he made the comment that paolini.net is the most in-depth author website he's ever been to. And it might not seem like that when you go to the website just starting, but there is a ton of content buried in the menus. So whether it's writing advice or author interviews or just stuff about Allegasia or other stuff, there's a lot there. So, have fun digging around. And if you are a fan of mine, stay tuned to social media for the next couple of weeks, especially. There's going to be a lot more coming out. We'll be releasing that concept art and other things. So yeah, lots of fun new things. I mean, basically, I'm having fun, and I want to share that with all the readers. I'm making things that I think are cool to share with people, because I know other people probably will think they look cool, and I just I like sharing this experience. I mean, the reason I tell stories is to share them with people. So I just want to keep feeding into the Fractalverse, and I want to keep doing more Allegasia and fantasy and all sorts of cool stuff.
All right.
I have a request for a Discord. Any Discord plans?
Need to get on.
There's a Fractalverse subreddit /r Fractalverse. So go over there, and I think they might even have a Discord that started up.
Oh, well, there you go. It might already be one.
And I also post on Reddit when I have the time. So there's that.
Alrighty. Well, to everyone who is currently viewing live, thank you so much for joining us. If we missed your question, I humbly apologize. We try to catch all of them as we can. Sometimes there's repeats, so we eventually get to it. It'll get answered. And thank you to Christopher for joining us, sharing his brain mass and all of his, personal expertise. And thank you to Lauren over here. I almost lost track of where I was pointing, for being the amazing person that she is. Because without her, there would be no the writers. I just want all y'all to know that, and now it's forever on YouTube, and it can never be forgotten. And with that, be sure to check us out next week, where we're going to talk about more reading, writing, and everything in between right here on Keystroke Mediums.